The biggest storm of August will be coming to the United States over the next few days, and this will bring a multi-day severe weather event, which will begin tonight and run all the way through Wednesday. And this is going to bring the potential for damaging winds, large to very large hail, and a few tornadoes anywhere from the northern and central plains back into the Midwest and even parts of the Ohio Valley, and then eventually into the Northeast. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about this storm and why there is a little bit more concern than just a couple of days ago. We are going to begin with what's happening across the United States this afternoon, which overall the weather's been pretty quiet for the most part across the entire lower 48. Anywhere east of the Rocky Mountains, there's barely any cloud cover. Like, you really can't ask for much better weather here at the end of August, and here we are. There's only a few clouds out there, but one thing that we are watching for is at least some storm initiation right now across South Dakota and back into Wyoming and Colorado, and we are going to be watching for severe weather this evening across areas in the northern plains and back into Colorado, even Utah, where damaging winds, hail, and an isolated tornado will be possible. And this is all responsible due to this negatively tilted trough that we have in the northwestern United States. And as this gradually moves east, it is going to bring the risk for severe weather, especially tomorrow and Tuesday, to the northern and central plains and as well as the Midwest. So this is going to be something that we're watching for very closely over the next couple of days, because this will probably be the biggest storm when it comes to severe weather that we'll see over the next couple of weeks. Let's talk more about the severe weather potential for the next few days, and we'll begin with today, which is Suspicious Storms Sunday. We do currently have two slight risks of severe weather, and when we made our video this morning, there was only one. We do have a new one across parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and even back into parts of New Mexico and Arizona. The main concern in that area will be damaging winds and hail, and then we have another slight risk back over in parts of the northern plains like Minnesota, North and South Dakota, where damaging winds, hail, and the potential for an isolated tornado or two will be possible. Storms are expected to be really isolated, and it's a really conditional threat for severe weather overall. So I'm not super confident that we're going to see anything too crazy here, but we'll be keeping a close eye on it. I am not expecting to go live for this particular event. Right now, we're looking at mostly a wind threat. There's also a hail risk. Again, it should be pretty isolated to widely scattered. Our tornado risk for tonight, predominantly in Minnesota and North and South Dakota. Now, by tomorrow, things are going to ramp up a lot more. We're going to be talking about a bit more of a concerning day, in my opinion, for severe weather, which is hence why I'm making a second video today, because I want to talk more about this, and I also want to talk more about Tuesday's risk for severe weather. In the event that I don't have a video tomorrow morning, I kind of want to cover this now. So what we're looking at currently for Monday is an enhanced risk for severe weather across South Dakota, Minnesota, western Wisconsin, and even extreme northern Nebraska. This has grown a little bit in size, and the other thing that's grown is the slight risk, which now includes more of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and even the upper Michigan Peninsula. Now, there's also a slight risk over in New England, predominantly just for southern New England, where damaging winds will be a possibility. Now, here's what we're looking at for the main concerns for tomorrow. It's going to be predominantly a damaging wind threat. Notice that hatched area. That is where we're going to be watching for damaging winds that could at times exceed 70, 80, and even at times 90 miles per hour. So definitely make sure that you're hatching down trampolines, protecting loose line items. Make sure that you're taking all the proper precautions tonight rather than tomorrow, especially even if you're back over in like Minneapolis, for example. I don't think we're talking about as much of a tornado risk there, but the hail and wind risk are definitely up there. Now, the hail risk is also hatched, and this is the area that we're watching for the greatest concern for very large hail. There will be a couple of storms tomorrow that produce hail that it does exceed baseball-sized hail at times. So make sure if you're in southwest or even central Minnesota, back into southeast South Dakota, that you are protecting your vehicle as well. The hail risk, I think, will be peaking anywhere from about 2 to 3 o'clock all the way through about 8 o'clock or so. The tornado risk for now is still a 5% tornado risk. I don't expect this to go to a 10% at this point, but I do think that our tornado risk will definitely be the greatest in southeast South Dakota and southwestern Minnesota. Now, unfortunately, I did eat cheese curds from Culver's today. That's the first time in a month, and if you're a regular on the channel, you know when that happens, things can go crazy. So I will just throw that out there. If you're in South Dakota, definitely make sure that you have a tornado action plan ready to go. Now, here's what we're looking at for tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday. We have a large slight risk of severe weather across the Great Lakes region and parts of the Midwest, and there's also a marginal threat that runs back into the Central Plains and even parts of the Northeast. Main concern right now for Tuesday is wind and hail. Would not rule out an isolated tornado or two, but I think the risk for tornadoes is lower on Tuesday than it will be for Monday. So keep that in mind. I think the risk is going to be a bit lower on Tuesday. I think it's going to be mostly a wind threat when it comes to the Midwest and as well as even the northern Ohio Valley. Now here's the future radar for the rest of today. There will be a few storms that try to fire higher up in South Dakota, and as well as back through parts of North Dakota and northwest Minnesota. Again, hail and wind are the main concerns, and then as we go into tonight, those storms do weaken pretty quickly. Overnight, there could be still a few lingering showers and thunderstorms in Minnesota, but they shouldn't really be anything crazy aside from just maybe some gusty winds. And then once we go into Monday morning, that's when things get a little bit more interesting. And I'm going to jump to the tornado parameter values for tomorrow because it gives you a better idea of where this tornado risk is going to be the greatest at. So this is what we're looking at right around 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I think our greatest corridor for a tornado threat will be in southwest Minnesota and southeast South Dakota. Now, here's what I want to point out here is that this tornado risk does still have a lot of uncertainty because one thing that we're going to need is discrete supercells in this area. And if we don't have any, the tornado threat will not be crazy tomorrow. But if we do, which I think we will, I do think tomorrow could go crazy in this area, and we very easily could see a couple of tornadoes in southwest Minnesota or even southeast South Dakota. Now, this tornado risk will drop into northwest Iowa, and if any storms are able to develop down here in northwest Iowa sometime just around sunset or even just before it, we could end up seeing an isolated tornado in that area as well. But I think overall, even though the tornado parameter values drop here into parts of like central Iowa, I don't think we're going to see a tornado risk that far down to the south. The NAM model also shows the greatest corridor being here in southwest Minnesota. I honestly agree with this. I think southeast South Dakota or even southwest Minnesota are going to have the greatest chance for that tornado risk. Things could definitely change a little bit between now and tomorrow, so just keep that in mind. We definitely could see some changes to the forecast, but right now I think that this is a pretty good, an indicator at least of what we're going to see tomorrow. I think the greatest tornado threat will be in southeast South Dakota and again southwest Minnesota. Here's what we're looking at for the timing for tomorrow. So again, tomorrow morning, mostly just elevated showers and thunderstorms in South Dakota. Once we get closer to lunchtime, this will be turning into some like isolated damaging wind and hail threat in South Dakota. And as these storms roll to the east, there will be predominantly a wind threat eventually going towards Minnesota right around 2 to 3 o'clock. And these storms will be, for the most part, just semi-discrete and linear, meaning that this should be mostly wind and hail. But if any storm can stay a little bit more discrete, especially on the southern side of whatever develops here, we could end up seeing a tornado or two. By 5 o'clock, the HRRR model indicating that we do have a potential for 1 or even 2 discrete cells firing off. This is the area, though, that we're watching for that tornado risk to really, maximize itself, basically. So definitely be weather aware if you're in this area. And then once we get closer to 6, 7, 8 o'clock, those storms continue to roll to the east. Notice the HRRR model has several discrete supercells, but again, I think this is going to be the environment where we're watching mainly for the tornado risk. Could still see an isolated tornado out of this activity, but I think it'll be more of a wind threat. As we go later into the evening, we're going to start to see this form more into a line of thunderstorms. This is probably when we will not be live because it's just going to be mostly wind, but we'll be watching this closely as it continues to move towards Wisconsin, throughout Minnesota, and as well as even parts of northern Iowa, and there will be just mostly wind out of that. And then by the morning hours, things are drying out across the northern plains, and then our next shot for severe weather will be Wednesday or Thursday, again in the northern plains. Timing for the Midwest, not really much for tomorrow. Again, it's gonna be pretty dry unless you're in Wisconsin or back in the upper Michigan Peninsula. As we go into Tuesday morning, a line of storms will be moving across Wisconsin that will move into Michigan, producing mainly a wind threat with maybe an isolated tornado. I'm not expecting to go live for this either, as it should be a pretty isolated to widely scattered risk. Now, as we go into the afternoon, things do become a little bit more uncertain because once this line of storms moves through, that's going to kind of stabilize the atmosphere across most of the Midwest, but we are expecting some storms to initiate as we go into the afternoon hours. The HRW model showing storms firing off in several areas, including parts of the Central Plains, back over in southern Iowa, back over in Indiana, even a few in Illinois. Now, on the flip side of things, if we go to a different model, like the European model shows a line of storms firing up back up in parts of central Wisconsin, right around, dinner time, basically, and that will eventually move down to the south across parts of Illinois and Iowa, with mostly a wind risk out of this. So there's a couple of scenarios that could definitely go down on Tuesday. So with that said, there's a lot of uncertainty, hence why we only have a slight risk right now for severe weather, and it's also a pretty large area with definitely some uncertainty. But we'll have another video for you either tomorrow or Tuesday morning updating you on what to expect for Tuesday and as well as beyond Tuesday. Now, beyond Tuesday, we're going to talk a little bit about beyond Tuesday. I think overall that trough will continue to move to the east. We'll be watching for at least an isolated risk for showers and thunderstorms in the northeast on Wednesday. And once we go into Thursday, our next shot for severe weather will come out of this trough back over here in Canada. We'll be watching mainly the northern plains on Wednesday and Thursday. And then by late Thursday into Friday, we could have some severe weather rumbling into parts of the central plains like Kansas, back into the Midwest, including the Chicago suburbs. And then as we go into Friday, I think we'll be watching watching for more of an isolated risk for severe weather in the Ohio Valley and maybe even back through Missouri. And then by Saturday, this moves into the Northeast, and then we're quiet again as we go into next week with no signs right now of a hurricane or tropical storm in the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.